Hello there everyone, welcome to Nightmare Narratives. I am your storyteller and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from and what time is it in your part of the world? Now, find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Samuel Ironwood, and I need to tell you about something that happened in the winter of 1979. Something that changed everything I thought I knew about the world. I was 44 years old then, working as a ranger in Algonquin Provincial Park, up in Ontario. Been doing that job for 18 years, and I was good at it. Really good. I taught winter survival training to new rangers, and in all that time, I never lost a single trainee. Not one. My dad was Ojibwe, and he used to tell me stories about things that lived in the deep woods. Stories about the Wendigo creatures that were once human, but turned into something else when they got so hungry they ate other people. I always thought those were just old tales, ways to teach kids not to wander off alone, or to share food when times got tough. Sam, my dad would say, starvation can drive a person to terrible things, but some hungers never stop, even after the feeding. I'd just nod and smile. I was a modern guy with modern training. I knew about hypothermia, about how the cold could mess with your head. I figured that explained all the old stories. The winter of '79 was the coldest on record. We're talking -40 degrees, wind that could cut through 3 layers of clothing, and snow that fell for days without stopping. Perfect conditions for training new rangers, if you ask me. Nothing teaches you about survival like real survival. I had 8 trainees that year, good kids, mostly, fresh out of school, eager to learn. There was Maria Santos, who'd been a teacher before deciding she wanted to work outdoors. Pete Mitchell, a big guy from Toronto who thought he was tough, until he met his first real blizzard. The others, well, their names don't matter much now. We set up our training camp about 60 miles from the nearest town, right on the shore of Canoe Lake. Beautiful spot in the summer, but in January it was just miles and miles of frozen white. The lake was solid ice, thick enough to drive a truck. On the trees stood like black skeletons against the snow, and the only sounds were wind and the crack of ice settling. Our camp was simple, a main lodge with a big fireplace, a couple of smaller cabins, and a supply shed. We had generators for power, propane for heat, and enough food to last 2 weeks. Standard setup for winter training. The first few days went normal. I taught them how to read weather signs, how to build emergency shelters, how to find water when everything's frozen. Basic stuff, but it could save your life out there. Then the radio went dead. Ice storm had knocked down the towers. They said, when we finally got through on the emergency channel, be back up in a few days. They said, don't worry, they said. But I was starting to worry. Little things at first. The camp dogs, 3 German shepherds we kept for avalanche training. They started acting strange, whimpering at night, refusing to go outside. These were tough animals, used to the cold, but something had them spooked. The generator started acting up too. It would run fine all day, then just stop in the middle of the night. I'd go out to check it, and the thing would be covered in frost, like it had been sitting there for hours. But it had been running just fine when I went to bed. Something's not right, Maria said on the 4th day. She was sitting by the window, watching the tree line. The forest is too quiet. She was right. In all my years out there, I'd never heard silence like that. No birds, no small animals moving through the underbrush. Even the wind seemed muffled, like the whole world was holding its breath. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what my dad used to say. The Wendigo comes when the cold gets so bad that even the animals know to leave. I got up around midnight to check on the trainees. They were all sleeping, bundled up in their bags around the dying fire. Everything looked normal. But when I stepped outside to check the generator, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Footprints in the snow, but not human footprints. These were huge, maybe 16 inches long, with what looked like claw marks at the front. They started at the tree line and came right up to our supply shed. Then they just stopped. I followed them with my flashlight, but they didn't continue anywhere. It was like whatever made them had just vanished into thin air. I told myself it was probably just a bear. We had black bears in the area, and sometimes they didn't hibernate if the winter started to warm. But I'd seen bear tracks before, and These were different. Too long, too narrow, and bears don't usually walk on two legs. I checked the supply shed. The door was still locked. Everything looked normal, but there was a smell inside, something rotten and sweet, like meat that had gone bad. I figured maybe some of the canned goods had gotten damaged by the cold. The next morning, I decided to take the trainees out for a long-distance exercise. Get them moving, get their blood flowing. Sometimes the best way to handle weird feelings is to stay busy. We hiked about 5 miles out to an old logging camp, a place that had been abandoned since the 1800s, just some rotting buildings and rusted equipment. But it was good for teaching them how to use old structures for shelter. Pete found the bones. He was poking around in what used to be the camp kitchen when he started yelling. We all came running, and there he was, standing over a pile of human bones. Old ones, yellowed with age. But they weren't just scattered around like you'd expect from someone who died natural. They were arranged, lined up neat and tidy, like someone had been saving them. And they were cracked open, every single one, like something had been sucking out the marrow. Could be old logging accident, I said, but my voice sounded shaky even to me. Lots of men died in these camps back in the day. Maria picked up one of the bones, a leg bone, thick and heavy. Sam, she said quietly, look at this. There were teeth marks on it, human teeth marks. But the gouges were too deep, too wide. Like whoever did the biting had a jaw that could unhinge like a snake's. That's when I knew we were in trouble. We got back to camp just as the sun was setting. The whole hike back, nobody talked much. The trainees were spooked by what we'd found, and I didn't blame them. I was spooked too, but I was also thinking. My dad's stories didn't seem so silly anymore. Stories about people who got so hungry, they ate their own kind, then couldn't stop eating. Stories about things that looked like people but weren't people anymore. Hey, Sam, Pete called out as we approached the camp. Why is the supply shed door open? I looked where he was pointing. The shed door was hanging wide, moving back and forth in the wind. I know I'd locked it that morning. I always lock it. Stay here, I told the group. Maria, you're in charge. Get everyone inside the lodge and start a fire. I walked over to the shed with my flashlight. The lock was still there, but it had been twisted open like someone had grabbed it with their bare hands and just pulled until it broke. The metal was bent and torn, edges sharp as razors. Inside, most of our food was gone, not taken, eaten. Right there in the shed, empty cans scattered around, their contents gone. Bags of flour torn open and licked clean. Even some of the freeze stuff had been opened and devoured. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I found in the corner. A pile of human waste, fresh, still warm in the cold air. But it was full of things that shouldn't be there. Bits of metal from the can lids, pieces of plastic wrapping, things that would kill a normal person to eat, and bones. Small ones, like from birds or squirrels, all cracked and split. I backed out of that shed so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. We need to radio for help. I told Maria when I got back to the lodge, right now. But the radio was dead. Not just quiet, dead. When we opened it up, the insides were covered in ice, like someone had breathed on it with breath so cold it froze the electronics solid. What's going on, Sam? Asked one of the younger trainees. Jenny, I think her name was. She was barely 20, fresh out of college. You look like you've seen a ghost. I almost laughed. A ghost would have been easier to handle. That night, we all stayed in the main lodge. I told everyone it was because of the generator problems, but really I just wanted us all together. Safety in numbers, you know? We played cards for a while, told stories. I tried to keep things normal, but I could see the fear in their eyes. They knew something was wrong. Around 10 o'clock, we heard it for the first time, a howling, but not like any animal I'd ever heard. It started low, like a wolf, then climbed higher and higher until it sounded almost human, almost like screaming. Coyotes, I said quickly. We get them sometimes in the winter, but coyotes don't make your teeth ache when they howl. They don't make your stomach turn over and your hands shake. This sound did all of that and more. Pete went to look out the window. I don't see anything, he said, but ... Sam, come look at this. I joined him at the window. The snow outside was disturbed, like something big had been moving around, but there were no tracks, just areas where the snow had been pushed aside, leaving dark patches of earth underneath. It's like something was dragging itself, Pete whispered. But what drags itself through snow? I didn't answer, because I was pretty sure I knew. The howling came again, closer this time. It seemed to come from right outside the lodge, but when I looked out, there was nothing there. Just empty snow, and black trees. Everyone away from the windows. I said, now. We moved to the center of the room, around the fire. I tried to think of what my dad would do. He'd dealt with things like this before, back when he was young. He'd told me stories about hunters who went into the deep woods and came back changed, about families who disappeared in the winter and were found in the spring, scattered around their cabins like they'd been feeding on each other. Sam, Maria said quietly, you know what this is, don't you? I looked at her. She was smart, had done her research on local folklore before coming. Up here, what do you think it is, Wendigo? She said. That's what the Ojibwe call it, a cannibal spirit, something that was human once, but turned into something else. The younger trainees looked at us like we were crazy. Come on, Jenny said. You're trying to scare us. But then we heard something that made everyone go quiet. Scratching, long, slow scratches against the outside wall of the lodge, like fingernails on wood, but deeper, stronger. The sound went on, moving around the building like whatever was making it was circling us. It's just a bear, Pete said, but his voice was shaking. Bears scratch at cabins sometimes. The scratching stopped. For a moment, everything was quiet except for the crackling of the fire. Then something hit the wall so hard the whole lodge shook. Pictures fell off the walls and the fire flickered. We all jumped, and Jenny started crying. What was that? She whispered. I didn't know, but I was starting to understand that we were dealing with something that had once been human, but wasn't anymore. Something that had gotten so hungry it had eaten its own kind, and now it couldn't stop. Something that was hunting us. The scratching started again, but this time it was on the roof. Slow, deliberate scratches moving from one end of the building to the other, like something was up there, testing to see if it could get in. Everyone stayed calm, I said, but I was grabbing the rifle from the gun rack. We're going to be okay. But deep down, I wasn't sure we were. Deep down, I was starting to think that maybe my dad's stories were more than just stories. Maybe they were warnings, and maybe I should have listened. The scratching stopped around midnight, but none of us slept. We took turns keeping watch, feeding the fire, checking the doors and windows. I kept the rifle close, though I wasn't sure what good it would do against something that might already be dead. When morning came, I was the first one outside. I had to see what we were dealing with. The scratches on the wall were deep, deeper than any bear could make. They went all the way down to the wood underneath the paint. But it was the scratches on the roof that really got to me. They were in patterns, not random scratches like an animal would make, but deliberate marks, almost like writing, but in no language I recognized. And they were burned into the wood, like whatever made them had fingers hot enough to char timber. We need to get out of here, Maria said behind me. She'd come out to look too. This isn't some animal, Sam. This is something else. I nodded. I know, but the trucks won't start in this cold, and it's 60 miles to town. We'd never make it on foot. So what do we do? Before I could answer, Pete came running around the corner of the lodge. His face was white as the snow. Sam, he gasped. You need to see this. In the shed, we followed him to the supply shed. The door was hanging open again, even though I'd tried to fix it the night before. Inside, what was left of our food was scattered everywhere. But that wasn't what Pete wanted to show us. In the corner where I'd found the waste before, there was something new. A pile of bones, picked clean. But these weren't animal bones. They were human. Small ones, finger bones, pieces of ribs. Fresh ones, with bits of flesh still clinging to them. Where did these come from? Maria whispered. I didn't want to think about the answer, but I had to ask the question. Pete, where's Jenny? Pete's face went even whiter. I thought she was with you. We ran back to the lodge, calling Jenny's name. The other trainees were awake now, looking around confused. But Jenny's sleeping bag was empty. Her boots were gone. Her coat was gone. Maybe she went to the bathroom, one of the others suggested. But I knew better. I could feel it in my bones. She wasn't coming back. We found her an hour later, about 100 yards from the lodge, or what was left of her. She was spread out in the snow like she'd been arranged that way. Her arms and legs were in neat lines, her head placed carefully at the top. But she'd been opened, cleaned out, like something had been feeding on her from the inside. The strange thing was, there was no blood in the snow around her, not a drop. Like whatever had done this had been very careful not to waste anything. "We need to get out of here," Pete said. He was shaking so hard he could barely stand. "We need to leave right now." "Where can we go?" I asked. "It's 60 miles to town, and it's getting colder." "I don't care," Pete said. "We can't stay here." But Maria was looking at something in the snow near Jenny's body. "Sam," she said quietly, "look at this. More footprints. The same huge ones I'd seen before, but these were clearer. I could see the shape of them now. They were almost human, but wrong. Too long, too narrow, and instead of toes, there were claws." The prints led from Jenny's body back toward the forest, but they didn't go in a straight line. They wandered back and forth, like whatever made them had been dancing. "It's playing with us," Maria said. "This thing, whatever it is, it's not just hunting, it's having fun." That afternoon, we tried to make the trucks work. We had 2 old pickups that we used for supplies, but the cold had killed their batteries. We tried jumping them. We tried everything. Nothing worked. "We could walk," Pete suggested. "If we all stick together, take lots of supplies, ... We wouldn't make it 5 miles, I said. "Not in this weather. And that thing out there, it knows these woods better than we do." As the sun started to set, we barricaded ourselves in the lodge again. I nailed boards over the windows, pushed furniture against the doors. It probably wouldn't stop whatever was out there, but it might slow it down. "Sam," one of the trainees asked, "what is that thing?" I thought about my dad's stories, about the Wendigo, about people who got so hungry they ate their own kind, then couldn't stop eating, about spirits that were always cold, always hungry, always looking for the next meal. "It's something that used to be human," I said, "but it's not anymore. It's something that can't stop being hungry." "How do we kill it?" Pete asked. I shook my head. "I don't know if we can. My dad used to say that Wendigo can only be destroyed by fire, but I don't know if that's true." That night, the thing came back. We heard it moving around outside, but this time it wasn't just scratching at the walls. It was talking. Not in English, not in any language I recognized, but it sounded almost like singing. A low, rhythmic chanting that made my head hurt and my stomach turn. "It's trying to get in our heads," Maria said. "Don't listen to it." But it was hard not to listen. The chanting seemed to get into your bones, make you want to go outside and see what was making that sound. I had to hold on to the rifle just to keep from walking to the door. Then we heard Jenny's voice. "Let me in," she called from outside. "I'm so cold. Please let me in." Pete started to get up, but I grabbed his arm. "That's not Jenny," I said. "Jenny's dead." "But it sounds like her," Pete said. "What if she's okay? What if we were wrong?" "Pete," I said, "look at me. We found her body. She's dead." But the voice kept calling. "Please, I'm so cold. I just want to come inside and get warm." It went on for hours. Jenny's voice, begging to be let in, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, sometimes saying things that made no sense, like she was talking to people who weren't there. Around 3 in the morning, the voice changed. It became deeper, rougher, more like an animal trying to talk. "I know you're in there," it said. "I can smell you. I can taste your fear." Then it laughed, a sound like breaking glass and screaming wind. "I'm going to eat you all," it said, "one by one. And when I'm done, you'll be like me, always hungry, always cold, always looking for the next meal." That's when I knew we were dealing with something that had once been human but wasn't anymore. Something that remembered being human just enough to use our own voices against us. Something that was going to keep hunting us until we were all dead, or worse. The next morning, 2 more trainees were gone. Mike and Sarah. We found them like we'd found Jenny, arranged in the snow, cleaned out, no blood anywhere. But this time, there was something else. Carved into a tree near their bodies was a symbol. It looked like a man, but stretched out and twisted, with a huge mouth full of teeth. "It's marking its territory," Maria said. "This thing, it's not just killing us, it's claiming us." We were down to 5 people now. Me, Maria, Pete, and 2 others whose names I'm not going to tell you. They don't deserve to have their names attached to this story. That's when I made the decision to check my dad's old medicine bundle. He'd given it to me before he died, told me to keep it safe. I'd never opened it before, just kept it in my truck for sentimental reasons. Inside were things I didn't recognize. Dried herbs, small bones, a piece of what looked like burned wood, and a piece of paper with writing on it. My dad's handwriting. "For the Wendigo," it said. "When the hunger walks, Only fire can stop it. But the fire must be sacred, must be fed with cedar and sage, and someone must stay to make sure it burns completely. I showed the note to Maria. "You think this will work?" she asked. "I don't know," I said, "but it's the only chance we have." We spent the day gathering wood and preparing. We found cedar branches and sage in my dad's bundle. We set up a fire pit in the center of the lodge, right where we'd been sleeping. As night fell, we waited. The thing came just after dark, but this time it didn't hide. It didn't scratch at the walls or sing outside the windows. It walked right up to the front door and knocked. "Let me in," it said in Jenny's voice. "I'm so cold." "We know what you are," I called back. "We know you're not Jenny." The voice changed, became deeper, more animal. "Then you know I'm hungry, and I'm going to eat you all." Something hit the door so hard it splintered. The boards I'd nailed over it cracked and fell away. Another hit, and the door burst open. The thing that came through wasn't human anymore. It had been once, maybe long ago, but now it was something else. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, and thin as a skeleton. Its skin was grey and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes were black holes in its skull, and its mouth was full of yellowed teeth. Too many teeth, sharp as knives. It moved wrong, like its joints didn't work the way they should. But it was fast, faster than anything that size should be. "I can smell your fear," it said, and its voice was like grinding bones. "I can taste your desperation." One of the trainees screamed and ran for the back door. The thing moved like lightning, crossing the room in one impossible leap. We heard the trainee scream once, then nothing. "Light the fire," I yelled to Maria. "Now." She threw a match into the pile of cedar and sage. It caught immediately, burning with a strange blue flame that seemed to hurt the thing's eyes. The Wendigo hissed and backed away from the fire. "You cannot stop the hunger," it said. "The hunger is eternal." But the fire was working. The thing seemed smaller now, less solid, like the flames were burning away whatever was keeping it together. "Someone has to stay," I said, remembering my dad's note. "Someone has to make sure it burns completely." "I'll do it," Maria said. "I started this fire. I'll finish it." "No," I said. "This is my job, my responsibility." But Maria was already moving. She grabbed a burning branch from the fire and threw it at the Wendigo. It hit the thing square in the chest, and it screamed, a sound like all the hunger and cold and pain in the world. The Wendigo grabbed Maria, its claws digging into her shoulders. But instead of trying to get away, she held on. She pulled the thing closer to the fire, even as it was tearing at her. "Burn it all," she yelled. "Burn the whole place down." I understood. I grabbed more branches from the fire and threw them around the room. The old wood caught quickly, and soon the whole lodge was burning. The Wendigo was burning too. Its grey skin was peeling away, showing something even worse underneath. But it was also getting smaller, weaker. The flames were destroying it. "The hunger dies," it whispered as the fire consumed it. "But the cold remains. The cold always remains." Maria was burning too. The thing's claws had torn her up bad, and she was too close to the fire. But she was still holding on, still making sure the Wendigo couldn't escape. "Get out," she yelled to me. "Get out now." I grabbed Pete and the other trainee and we ran. Behind us, the lodge was an inferno. We could hear the Wendigo screaming as it burned, a sound that went on until the roof collapsed. We made it to the truck and somehow got it started. The cold had broken just enough for the engine to turn over. We drove through the night, not stopping until we reached town. When the authorities went back to investigate, they found the lodge burned to the ground. They found the bodies of the missing trainees, or what was left of them. They said it was a tragic accident, generator malfunction, fire, people trapped inside. They never found Maria's body. They never found anything that looked like the Wendigo. The official report said 4 people died in a fire and 3 survived. Just a terrible accident in a cold winter. But I know the truth, and I know that Maria died a hero, making sure that thing couldn't hurt anyone else. That was 45 years ago. I'm an old man now, and I've never talked about what really happened up there. Never told anyone about the Wendigo, about what we faced, about what Maria did, until now. I quit the ranger service after that. Couldn't go back into the deep woods, couldn't teach survival anymore. Instead, I became what my father had been, a traditional healer, someone who knows the old ways and the old dangers. Because the Wendigo isn't gone. It's never gone. Every winter, there are reports. people missing in the northern woods, hunters who go out and never come back, families who disappear from their cabins, leaving behind only scattered bones and strange marks in the snow. The authorities always find explanations: bear attacks, equipment failures, exposure. They never want to consider that there might be something else out there, something that was human once but isn't anymore. I've been back to that area a few times over the years. The lodge was never rebuilt. The land is still there, still empty. But sometimes, on the coldest nights, you can see a blue light flickering where the lodge used to be. Local people say it's just swamp gas, but I know better. It's Maria's fire, still burning, still keeping the Wendigo away. Pete moved south after what happened. Last I heard, he was working in an office somewhere warm, never going camping again. Can't say I blame him. The other trainee who survived, well, I won't say his name, but he's never been the same. Spends his winters in Mexico now. Says he can't stand the cold anymore. I understand. The cold gets into your bones after something like that. The memory of being hunted, of being prey, that never really goes away. But someone has to remember. Someone has to know the truth about what's out there in the deep woods. Someone has to be ready for the next time the Wendigo comes calling. Because it will come. It always does. The old stories exist for a reason. They're not just tales to scare children or explain away the unexplained. They're warnings, reminders that there are things in this world that are older and hungrier than we can imagine. So if you ever find yourself in the northern woods in winter, if you're ever cut off from civilization when the cold gets bad, remember this story. Remember what happened to us. And remember the most important rule: never eat anything you find in the deep woods. No matter how hungry you get, no matter how desperate you become, because some hungers can never be satisfied. Some hungers never die. They just wait in the cold, patient as winter itself, for the next person who gets hungry enough to make the terrible choice. The Wendigo is still out there, still hunting, still hungry, and it's waiting for you. My name is Samuel Ironwood, and this is what happened to me in the winter of 1979. I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know. Someone needs to remember, because the hunger that walks is never truly gone. It's just waiting for the next cold winter, the next desperate person, the next meal. My name is Catherine Morningstar, but everyone just calls me Cat. I've been a park ranger at the Grand Canyon for 13 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything this place could throw at me. Turns out I was wrong. October 1962 was when I learned my grandmother's stories weren't just fairy tales. They were survival instructions. I'm 31 years old, and I just got promoted to head ranger. That's a big deal for a woman in this job, especially a native woman. My grandmother always said I was stubborn like a mountain goat, and I guess that's what got me here. She raised me after my parents died, filling my head with stories about voice thieves that lived in the sacred canyons. Never follow familiar voices in places where they shouldn't be, she used to say. I thought it was just old superstition. The Grand Canyon is my home now. I know every trail, every rock formation, every dangerous spot where tourists like to take stupid pictures. I've got a geology degree, and I've pulled 73 people off ledges they had no business being on. I understand canyon acoustics better than most scientists. When sounds bounce off these walls, they can travel for miles and come back sounding like they're right next to you. That's how I always explained away the canyon voices that people reported. Sound waves, echo patterns, natural phenomena, nothing more. My partner Jake Thunderheart and I work the South Rim area. He's Hopi, grew up hearing the same kinds of stories I did. We make a good team. I handle the geology and safety stuff. He knows the cultural history. Together, we keep about 6 million visitors a year from killing themselves. The canyon's beautiful, but it's also deadly. One wrong step and you're falling a mile down. The heat can kill you in summer. The cold can freeze you in winter. And if you get hurt down there, it takes 45 minutes for help to reach you. That's if the radios work, which they don't always do in the deep parts. October was supposed to be easy. Tourist season was winding down. Weather was nice. Just routine patrols and maybe a few lost hikers. Then the newlyweds showed up at my office. "Ma'am, you're gonna think we're crazy," the young man said. His name was David and his wife was Sarah. They'd been married 3 days and were honeymooning at the canyon. "But we heard something down there that ain't right." I poured them coffee and got out my incident report forms. What kind of something? Sarah looked at her husband, then back at me. My father's voice. He's been dead 2 years. I kept my face neutral. People hear things in the canyon all the time. The wind echoes, their own minds playing tricks. Wick, did you hear this? About a mile down Bright Angel Trail, David said. We were taking pictures when Sarah just stopped. Said she heard her dad calling her name. I followed the voice, Sarah whispered. It led me off the trail to this cave I swear wasn't there before. David had to pull me back. I wrote down the details, but I wasn't too worried. Grief makes people hear things. The canyon's full of hidden caves and strange echoes. Did you see anything unusual? Any other hikers? That's the thing, David said. We went back with our camera to prove we were imagining it. Found the cave again, but ... double quotes. He handed me a photograph. The picture showed a small cave entrance, maybe 4 feet high, but scattered around the opening were bones. Human bones, and they looked fresh. That got my attention. We didn't go inside, Sarah said quickly. Just took the picture and got out of there. But I could still hear him calling. My daddy's voice, clear as day. I studied the photograph. The bones were definitely human. I could see part of a skull, some ribs, but there was something else that bothered me. The cave entrance looked natural, carved by water over thousands of years, but the bones were arranged in a pattern, like someone had placed them there on purpose. I need to check this out, I told them. Can you show me exactly where you found it? They agreed, though Sarah looked scared. I called Jake and told him to meet us at the trailhead. Standard procedure for any kind of human remains. As we walked down into the canyon, I kept thinking about my grandmother's stories. She used to tell me about things that lived in the deep places, creatures that could sound like anyone they wanted. But those were just stories. The October heat was unusual. It should have been cooling down by now, but it felt like July. The canyon was quiet too, quieter than normal. Usually you hear wind moving through the rocks, birds calling, the sound of the river far below. Today there was nothing. This is it, Sarah said, pointing to a gap in the canyon wall. Right here. I looked at the cave entrance. It was exactly like the photograph, but now I could see more bones scattered around. Some looked old, weathered gray by time. Others looked newer, and they weren't random. They were definitely arranged in some kind of pattern. Jake arrived a few minutes later. He took one look at the scene and his face went pale. Cat, he said quietly, we need to call this in. This isn't just some old burial site. I was already thinking the same thing. But as I reached for my radio, I heard something that made my blood run cold. My own voice, calling for help from somewhere deep inside the cave. The sound of my own voice echoing from that cave froze me solid. It was definitely my voice, same accent, same tone, even the same way I pronounce my words. But I was standing right there, mouth shut, not making a sound. Did you hear that? I whispered to Jake. He nodded, his eyes wide. Sounded like you calling for help. David and Sarah were looking at us like we'd lost our minds. We didn't hear anything, David said. That's when I realized something was very wrong. The voice had been clear as day to Jake and me, but the tourists hadn't heard it at all. That wasn't how echoes worked. Sound doesn't pick and choose who hears it. I tried my radio. Nothing but static. We were in one of the dead zones where the canyon walls blocked the signal. Standard procedure said we should hike back up and call for backup, but something told me not to leave this place unguarded. Jake, can you take them back to the rim? Get Sheriff Martinez on the radio and tell him we need the forensics team. I'm not leaving you here alone, Jake said. Someone needs to stay and secure the scene. I'll be fine. That was the first lie I told that day. I wasn't fine. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. Jake finally agreed to take the couple back up, but he made me promise to stay away from the cave until backup arrived. I promised, but I had my fingers crossed behind my back. Something about this whole situation felt personal, like it was meant for me specifically. After they left, I sat on a rock about 20 feet from the cave entrance and tried to think this through rationally. Human bones arranged in patterns could mean a lot of things. Maybe it was an old burial site. Maybe someone had robbed graves and dumped the bones here. Maybe it was connected to some kind of ritual or ceremony. But that didn't explain hearing my own voice. I pulled out my geology notebook and started sketching the bone pattern. As I drew, I noticed something strange. The bones weren't just scattered, they formed a rough circle around the cave entrance. And in the center of the circle, carved into the rock, was a symbol I recognized from my grandmother's stories. It looked like a person with their mouth wide open, but instead of a face, there was just an empty hole. The voice thief symbol. My grandmother used to trace that same symbol in the dirt when she told her stories. She said it was a warning, a way to mark places where the voice thieves hunted. I always thought it was just part of the story, something she made up to scare me into being careful. But here it was carved into solid rock that looked thousands of years old. I was so focused on the symbol that I almost didn't notice when the bones started moving. It wasn't much at first, just a slight shift, like the ground was settling. But then one of the skulls rolled a few inches closer to the cave entrance. Then another bone moved, and another. I stood up slowly, my heart hammering. There was no wind, no earthquake, nothing that should have been moving those bones. But they kept shifting, sliding across the rock, like they were being pulled by invisible strings. That's when I heard the voice again. My voice, but not quite right. It was like listening to a recording of myself, but the tone was wrong. The timing was off. Cat, help me. I'm hurt. Bad. Please. Cat, I'm in the cave. I can't get out. I took a step toward the cave entrance before I caught myself. My training kicked in. Never enter an unknown cave without proper equipment and backup. But the voice sounded so real, so desperate. Cat, please. I can see light from where you are. Just come a little closer. I knew it wasn't really me in there. I was standing right here, perfectly fine. But the voice was so convincing, so full of pain and fear. It made me want to help, even though I knew it was impossible. Who are you? I called out. What do you want? The voice changed. Now it sounded like my grandmother, speaking in Lakota the way she did when she was scared or angry. Granddaughter, you must run. The voice thief is waking up. It has been sleeping, but now it smells new voices to steal. Run, child. Run now. I knew my grandmother's voice like my own heartbeat. She'd been dead for 5 years, but that was definitely her speaking. Same accent, same words she used to call me. But how was that possible? I took another step toward the cave, then stopped. In the shadows just inside the entrance, I could see something moving, something big, taller than a person, with skin that looked like canyon rock and eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness, and it was watching me. The thing moved closer to the cave entrance, and I got a better look at it. It was maybe 9 feet tall, with long arms and legs that looked like they were made of red sandstone. Its face was almost human, but wrong somehow, and across its chest I could see what looked like other faces, dozens of them, all with their mouths open like they were screaming. Don't be afraid, it said in my grandmother's voice. I have been waiting for you to come home. That's when I ran. I scrambled up the rocks as fast as I could, trying to get back to the main trail. Behind me, I could hear the thing following, not footsteps exactly, but the sound of rock grinding against rock, like stone sliding down a cliff face. When I finally reached the trail, I turned back to look. The cave entrance was empty. The bones were gone. Even the symbol carved into the rock had disappeared, like it had never been there at all. But I could still hear voices calling from down in the canyon. My voice, my grandmother's voice, and others I didn't recognize. All of them calling my name, begging me to come back. I hiked back to the rim as fast as I could, but I knew I'd have to go back. Whatever was in that cave, it wasn't done with me yet. And somehow, I didn't think backup was going to be enough to stop it. When I got back to the ranger station, Jake was waiting for me with Sheriff Martinez and 2 deputies. Did you find anything? Martinez asked. I looked at Jake, then back at the sheriff. How could I explain what I'd seen without sounding crazy? The cave was empty, I said. False alarm. It was the second lie I told that day. But I had a feeling it wouldn't be the last. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those voices calling from the canyon. My voice, my grandmother's voice, and others I was starting to recognize. People I'd rescued over the years, people I'd known growing up, even people I'd seen in old photographs. I got up around 3 in the morning and drove out to the rim. I told myself I was just checking on things, making sure no night hikers had gotten into trouble. But really, I needed to see if what happened earlier was real. The canyon was beautiful. In the moonlight, all silver and shadow. Usually it made me feel peaceful, but tonight it felt wrong. Too quiet, like the whole place was holding its breath. I was standing at the rim when I heard my own voice calling from down below. Cat, where are you? I've been looking everywhere for you. I knew I should ignore it, but I couldn't help myself. I leaned over the edge and called back. I'm right here. What do you want? There was a pause, then my voice again, closer now. I want to show you something. Something grandmother left for you. That got my attention. I looked down and saw a light moving along the canyon floor, like someone carrying a flashlight. But the light was wrong, too bright, too white, and it didn't bob around like a person walking would make it do. Come down, my voice called. It's safe. I found the old trail, the one grandmother used to take when she was young. I actually took a step toward the trail before I caught myself. There was no old trail. My grandmother had never been to the Grand Canyon. She lived her whole life in South Dakota, 600 miles away from here. But the voice was so convincing, so familiar. It knew things about my grandmother that nobody else could know. I went back to my truck and tried to radio Jake, but all I got was static. I tried the sheriff's office, the park headquarters, even the highway patrol. Nothing. It was like every radio in the area had gone dead. The next morning, Jake showed up at my door before I was even dressed. Cat, we've got a problem, he said. 3 more tourists went missing last night, a family from Ohio. Mom, Dad, and 2 kids. I poured him coffee with shaking hands. Where? Bright Angel Trail. Same area where we found those bones yesterday. Except, ... double quotes. He paused, looking uncomfortable. The bones are back. We drove to the trailhead together. The missing family's car was still in the parking lot. Doors unlocked. Keys on the seat, like they'd just stepped out for a minute. Their names are Robert and Linda Mason, Jake said, reading from his notebook. Kids are Tommy, age 8, and Susan, age 6. They were staying at the El Tovar Hotel. Desk clerk says they left around sunset for a quick walk to see the canyon. As we hiked down the trail, I told Jake what had happened the night before. The voices, the light, the radio problems. He listened without interrupting, but I could see he was worried. My grandmother used to tell similar stories, he said finally, about things that lived in the deep places, creatures that could sound like anyone they wanted. She called them echo walkers, spirits that got lost between the world of the living and the world of the dead. They can't remember who they used to be, so they steal other people's voices and memories, trying to find their way. Back, we reached the spot where I'd seen the cave yesterday. The bones were back, arranged in the same pattern, but now there were more of them, and they looked fresher. Jake, I said quietly, look at the skull on the left. He looked, and his face went pale. The skull was small, child-sized, and it was wearing a bright red baseball cap, just like the one Tommy Mason had been wearing in the family photo we'd been given. We need to call this in, Jake said. With what? The radios don't work down here. Then we go back up, and Cat. The voice came from inside the cave. A child's voice, scared and crying. Cat, help us. We're stuck in here and we can't get out. I knew that voice. It was Tommy Mason, the 8-year-old boy who'd gone missing. Please, another voice. Also a child. It's dark and we're scared. That was Susan, the 6-year-old sister. Jake grabbed my arm. Don't listen to them. It's not real. But the voices sounded so real, so frightened. How could I ignore children calling for help? We have to at least look, I said. Cat, no, this is what it wants. It's trying to lure us in. Before I could answer, I heard another voice from the cave, an adult woman, crying. Oh God, please, somebody help us. My babies are hurt. Please, we need help. Linda Mason, the mother. She sounded desperate, broken. I took a step toward the cave entrance. Jake tried to stop me, but I shook him off. I have to try, I said. If there's even a chance they're alive, Cat. Wait. But I was already at the cave entrance, shining my flashlight into the darkness. The tunnel went back further than my light could reach, but I could see footprints in the dirt, small ones that could have been made by children. Hello, I called. This is Ranger Morningstar. Can you hear me? Cat. Tommy's voice, closer now. We're back here. Follow the tunnel. I took a step inside. The air was cold and smelled like old bones and something else, something sweet and rotten that made me want to gag. Keep coming. Susan's voice. We can see your light. I went deeper into the cave, following the tunnel as it curved to the right. The walls were covered with scratches and marks, like someone had been clawing at them. And everywhere there were bones, old ones, new ones, all arranged in careful patterns. Cat, You need to get out of there. Jake's voice behind me, but sounding far away. I ignored him and kept following the tunnel. The children's voices were getting closer, but now I could hear something else. A sound like stone grinding against stone, like something very large moving through the darkness ahead of me. Cat, Tommy's voice again, but now it sounded different. Wrong. Come closer, Cat. We want to see you. I stopped and aimed my flashlight. Ahead, in the beam of light, I saw something that made my blood freeze. It was the thing from yesterday, the tall figure made of canyon rock. But now, I could see it clearly. Its chest was covered with human faces, dozens of them, all different, ages, all with their mouths open in silent screams. And at the center, I could see the faces of the Mason family, Robert, Linda, Tommy, and Susan, all staring at me with dead eyes. We've been waiting for you, the thing said in my grandmother's voice. Now you can be with us forever. It reached out with arms that were too long, fingers that ended in claws made of stone. I turned to run, but the tunnel behind me was gone. There was nothing but solid rock wall. I was trapped. The echo walker moved closer, and I could hear all the voices it had stolen over the years. Men, women, children, all calling my name, all begging me to join them. And underneath it all, I heard my own voice, laughing. You can't escape it, said in my voice. I've been waiting so long for you to come home. That's when I remembered something my grandmother used to say. She had taught me songs in Lakota, old songs that were supposed to protect against evil spirits. I'd never believed they would work, but right now they were all I had. I started singing, loud and clear, in the old language. The echo walker stopped, moving, and tilted its head, listening. For a moment, the stolen voices went quiet. Then it smiled with a mouth full of broken teeth, and I realized I'd just made a terrible mistake. Thank you, it said in my grandmother's voice. Now I have that song too. The echo walker began singing my grandmother's protection song back to me. But wrong. The words were the same, but the melody was twisted, turned into something dark and hungry. As it sang, the faces on its chest began to move, their mouths opening and closing in rhythm with the awful song. I was trapped in solid rock with a creature that collected voices like trophies. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. What are you? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The thing stopped singing and looked at me with eyes that glowed like embers. I am the keeper of lost voices. I am the one who remembers what others forget. You're the echo walker, the one from the old stories. Stories. It laughed, and the sound came from all the faces on its chest at once. I am older than stories. I was here before the first human looked into this canyon. I was here when the rocks were young. Then why do you steal voices? The creature's expression changed, became almost sad. Because I forgot my own. Long ago, I was human like you. I lived in the sacred places, spoke with the spirits, helped my people. But I wanted more. I wanted to keep the voices of the dead, to never let them go. It moved closer, and I could see that the faces on its chest were not just decorations. They were real faces, somehow preserved in the stone of its body. The Mason family was there, and dozens of others, all of them staring at me with desperate, pleading eyes. The spirits punished me. The echo walker continued. They took my voice, my memories, my name. They bound me to this place and told me I could only leave when I remembered who I used to be. But how can I remember without a voice to speak my name? So you steal other people's voices to try to remember. I borrow them. I keep them safe. And sometimes, when I wear their voices long enough, I catch glimpses of who I used to be. I looked at the faces trapped in its chest, and I understood. This wasn't just a monster, it was a person who had become something terrible through their own actions, and now it was trying to find its way back by stealing pieces of everyone else. Let them go, I said. Let the Mason family go. They're innocent. Innocent. The echo walker laughed again. There is no innocent. Everyone has something they want to take from others. Everyone has something they want to keep that isn't theirs. That's not true, isn't it? You're here because you want to be the hero. You want to save people so they'll remember you as brave and good. You want to take their gratitude and keep it forever. The words hit me like a physical blow because there was truth in them. I had wanted to be the hero. I had wanted to prove that I could handle anything, that I deserved my promotion, that I was worthy of respect. Maybe, I said, but I'm not going to let you hurt anyone else. You can't stop me. I have the voices of everyone who ever tried. Would you like to hear them? The faces on its chest began to speak, one by one. rangers, sheriffs, tribal warriors, all telling me how they had tried to stop the Echo Walker and failed. Their voices mixed together into a chorus of defeat and despair. But as I listened, I heard something else. A pattern in the voices, a rhythm that sounded familiar. It was the same rhythm as the protection song my grandmother had taught me, but inverted, like a reflection in dark water. That's when I understood. The Echo Walker wasn't just stealing voices, it was collecting them, because it needed them to maintain its power. And if I could disrupt that pattern, maybe I could weaken it. I started singing again, but this time I sang a different song. A children's song my grandmother had taught me, simple and pure. The Echo Walker tried to copy it, but the song was too innocent, too joyful. He couldn't twist something that had no darkness in it. "Stop," it said, stumbling backward. "Stop singing." I kept singing, and the faces on its chest began to change. Some of them started to look less desperate, less afraid. The Mason children even smiled a little. "You're hurting it," said a voice behind me. I turned and saw Jake standing in the tunnel. The solid rock wall was gone, and he was shining his flashlight at the Echo Walker. "How did you get in here?" "I never left. I've been calling your name for the past hour, but you couldn't hear me. You were like you were in a trance." I looked around. We were still in the cave, but now I could see it was much smaller than it had seemed before. The Echo Walker was still there, but it looked different, smaller, more human, and the faces on its chest were fading, becoming less distinct. "It's losing power," Jake said. "Keep singing." I sang louder, and Jake joined in with a Hopi song his grandmother had taught him. The two songs wove together, creating something stronger than either one alone. The Echo Walker fell to its knees, clutching at its chest. The faces were disappearing one by one, and as they did, I could hear voices calling out in relief and joy. The Mason family, the other victims, all of them being freed from their prison. "Wait," the Echo Walker said, and now its voice was different, smaller, more human. "Please, I remember now. I remember my name." It looked up at me, and I saw that its face had changed too. It was still made of stone, but now it looked like a person instead of a monster. An old man, weathered and tired. "My name was Joseph Running Bear," it said. "I was a shaman of the Havasupai people. I lived here 200 years ago, when the canyon was still wild and sacred. What happened to you?" "I lost my family to sickness. My wife, my children, my grandchildren, all of them gone in one terrible winter. I couldn't bear to let them go, so I used forbidden magic to keep their voices with me. But the spirits were angry. They cursed me to walk between worlds, never living, never dying, never able to rest." The stone skin was cracking now, falling away like old paint. Underneath, I could see the ghost of the man he had once been. "I've been so lonely," he whispered, "so lost. I forgot why I was taking voices. I forgot that I was supposed to be looking for my family, not keeping strangers prisoner. They're gone now," I said gently. "Your family is gone, and you need to let them go too. I know, but I'm afraid. What if there's nothing after this? What if I just ... Stop." Jake stepped forward. "There's something after this. My grandmother always said the spirits wait for us on the other side. Your family is waiting for you." Joseph Running Bear nodded, tears streaming down his cracking face. "Will you sing me home?" We sang together, all three of us, until the Echo Walker crumbled into dust and blew away on a wind that came from nowhere. The cave began to collapse, but we were already running, following Jake's flashlight back to the surface. When we reached the cave entrance, I turned back to look one more time. The opening was gone, sealed up with rocks that looked like they'd been there for centuries. But carved into the stone above where the entrance had been was a new symbol. Not the voice thief mark, but something else. A man with his arms raised to the sky. Finally, free. The Mason family was found 3 days later, alive but confused, sitting on a bench at the El Tovar Hotel. They had no memory of the past week, no idea how they'd gotten there. The doctors said it was probably shock from being lost in the canyon, but I knew better. The Echo Walker had kept their voices, but when he died, he'd let them go, along with all the other voices he'd collected over the years. Dozens of missing persons cases were suddenly solved as people turned up in towns hundreds of miles away, all with the same story. They'd been somewhere else, but they couldn't remember where. I filed my report, but I kept it simple. Missing, family found safe, no sign of foul play, case closed. Sheriff Martinez was happy to have it off his books, and the Park Service was glad to avoid bad publicity. But I knew the truth, and more importantly, I knew it wasn't over. 3 weeks later, I was working late in the ranger station when Jake knocked on my door. "Cat, we need to talk." He looked worried, and Jake didn't worry easily. I poured him coffee and waited. "I've been doing some research," he said, "about the Echo Walker, about the old stories. I think what happened here isn't unique." "What do you mean?" "I mean I think there are other sacred places where people tried to use forbidden magic and got trapped between worlds. Other voice thieves." He pulled out a folder full of newspaper clippings and old reports. Missing persons cases from national parks across the country. Yellowstone, Yosemite, the Everglades, places where people reported hearing familiar voices calling them into the wilderness. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a report from Yellowstone. "Family of 4 disappeared near Old Faithful. Last seen following voices toward the geyser basin." I read through the reports. The patterns were all the same people, hearing voices of dead relatives, following them into dangerous areas, disappearing without a trace. And in every case, the local tribes had stories about voice thieves, or spirit trappers, or soul collectors. "So what do we do about it?" "We learn," Jake said. "We study the old stories, talk to the elders, figure out how to spot these things before they hurt anyone else. And if we find another one, then we stop it, like we did here." I thought about Joseph Running Bear, about the lonely centuries he'd spent trapped between worlds, about all the voices he'd collected, trying to fill the hole where his family used to be. "Jake, when we were in the cave, you said your grandmother told you stories about the Echo Walker." "Yeah. Did she ever tell you why they happened? Why people get trapped like that?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "She said it was because they couldn't accept loss. They loved so much that they couldn't let go, and that love turned into something dark." I nodded. That made sense. Love was supposed to be about letting go, about wanting what was best for the other person. But sometimes love became about possession, about keeping something that wasn't yours to keep. "My grandmother left me something," I said. "A journal. I found it in her things after she died, but I never read it. Always figured it was just recipes and family stories." That night, I went home and found my grandmother's journal. Most of it was exactly what I'd expected. Recipes, stories about relatives, observations about the weather. But in the back, there were pages I'd never seen before. Pages about the voice thieves, about the old ceremonies used to stop them, about the family responsibility to protect sacred places from those who would abuse them. "The voice thieves are not evil," she had written. "They are people who lost their way, who let their love become a cage. We must stop them not because they are monsters, but because they are still human underneath, and humans deserve to rest." There was more. Stories about other family members who had faced voice thieves, instructions for protection rituals, even a map showing places where the spirits with thin and dangerous magic was possible. I was what she had called a keeper of the threshold, someone whose job was to guard the places where the living world touched the spirit world, someone who could walk between both worlds safely and help others find their way. I had a choice to make. I could file the journal away, pretend I'd never seen it, go back to my normal life as a park ranger, or I could accept the responsibility that came with my heritage. The next morning, I called Jake and told him about the journal. "So what do we do?" he asked. "We do what our grandmothers would have done. We learn, we prepare, and we make sure no one else gets trapped like Joseph Running Bear. The Park Service isn't going to like us chasing ghosts. Then we do it on our own time. We take vacations to places where people are disappearing. We research the old stories. We become the people others call when they hear voices that shouldn't be there." Jake was quiet for a moment. "You know this isn't going to be easy. Most people will think we're crazy. Maybe, but some people will know we're not. And those are the people who need our help." That was 6 months ago. Since then, Jake and I have investigated 7 cases across 5 states. We've found 3 more voice thieves and helped 2 of them find peace. The 3rd one is still out there, but we know where it is, and we're keeping an eye on it. The work is hard, and sometimes dangerous. We've both been hurt, and we've both seen things that will give us nightmares for years to come. But we've also saved lives, and we've helped lost spirits find their way home. My grandmother was right about one thing. The old stories weren't just entertainment. They were instructions, passed down from generation to generation. teaching us how to survive in a world where the impossible was just another part of the job. And every time someone asks me about the voices they've heard in the canyon, I tell them the same thing my grandmother told me: never follow familiar voices in places where they shouldn't be, because sometimes the voice calling your name isn't trying to guide you to safety. Sometimes it's trying to add your voice to its collection, and sometimes the only way to save someone is to help them remember that love means letting go. The Grand Canyon is beautiful, but it's also dangerous. It's a place where the living world and the spirit world touch, where impossible things can happen if you're not careful. If you ever visit, enjoy the view, take pictures, hike the trails, but remember, if you hear someone calling your name from the depths of the canyon, someone who couldn't possibly be there, don't follow that voice. Find a ranger instead. Find someone who knows the old stories. Find someone who can help you get home safely, because the canyon keeps its secrets, but it doesn't have to keep you. My name is Michael Stormcrow, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years. Most folks call me Mick. I patrol the boundary waters up in Minnesota, where the lakes stretch on forever and the nearest road is 40 miles away. It's wild country. Up there, the kind of place where you can paddle for days without seeing another soul. I grew up hearing stories from my grandfather about things that lived in the deep woods. He was a fur trapper back in the day, and he'd tell me about the French voyageurs who came through these waters 200 years ago. They had stories about the Lougarou-cursed traders who became wolves. I never believed any of it, even though my mother was a wildlife biologist who always said the old stories usually had some truth buried in them. September 1991 was when I learned the difference between wolves and something else entirely. It started with a call about poachers. Nothing new there. We get idiots coming into the wilderness to shoot whatever they can find. But this time was different. When we found their camp, it looked like a tornado had hit it. Tents were shredded to ribbons. Rifles were bent in half, like someone had twisted them into pretzels. And there was blood everywhere. We found one of the poachers 3 miles away, sitting by a tree. He was alive, but wouldn't talk. Just stared at nothing with these wide, empty eyes. When the medical team finally got him to say something, all he whispered was, "Wolves that walk like men." That should have been my first warning. I was working with Lisa Redwing, another ranger who'd been on the job for about 5 years. She was tough as nails and knew these woods better than anyone. When we saw the destroyed camp, she just shook her head and said it had to be a bear. But I'd seen bear attacks before. Bears don't bend steel rifles in half. The compass in my canoe started acting weird that first day. The needle would spin around like it was drunk, then point in completely wrong directions. Lisa's GPS kept giving us readings that put us miles from where we actually were. We figured it was just equipment problems, but looking back, I think something was messing with our gear from the start. The woods felt wrong too. In all my years patrolling these waters, I'd never heard them so quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the mosquitoes seemed scared. The wolf packs that usually lived in the area had vanished. We didn't hear a single howl for 3 days. That's when we found the second camp. 4 more poachers had been camping on a small island about 10 miles from the first site. This time, we didn't find anyone alive. We didn't find much of anyone at all. There were pieces of camping gear scattered around like confetti, sleeping bags torn to shreds, a cooler that had been ripped open with claws, big claws. But what really got our attention were the tracks. At first they looked like wolf prints, big ones, maybe from a wolf that weighed close to 200 pounds. But as we followed them around the campsite, something strange happened. The paw prints started changing. They got longer, the claw marks spread out wider, and then, about 50 feet from the camp, they turned into human footprints. "That's impossible," Lisa said, kneeling down to measure them. "Animals don't just change their feet." But there they were, clear as day in the mud. Wolf tracks that became human tracks, like someone had shifted from walking on 4 legs to walking on 2. We called it in 2 headquarters, but our radio kept cutting out. Every time we tried to transmit, we'd get static mixed with what sounded like voices but not human voices, more like howling that almost formed words. That night, we camped on a peninsula about a mile from the second attack site. We figured we'd be safe with water on 3 sides of us. I was wrong about that too. I woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of something moving through the water. Not swimming, walking, like someone was wading through the shallows. But the footsteps were too heavy and too far apart to be human. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the edge of our camp. The moon was almost full, giving everything a silver glow. That's when I saw them. 3 shapes moving through the water toward our camp. They were huge, maybe 8 feet tall, and they moved wrong, like they were walking on their back legs, but their bodies were all wrong for standing upright. Their heads were too long, their arms too thick, and they had these glowing eyes that reflected the moonlight like mirrors. I should have woken Lisa. I should have grabbed my gun. Instead, I just stood there, frozen, watching these things wade through the water toward us. One of them lifted its head and looked right at me. That's when I realized it wasn't just an animal. There was intelligence in those eyes. It was thinking, planning, deciding what to do with us. It opened its mouth, or what I thought was its mouth, and let out a sound that still gives me nightmares. It was like a wolf's howl, but deeper, and it formed words. We, ... smell. You. I stumbled backward, tripped over our canoe, and went down hard. When I looked up again, they were gone. Lisa woke up to find me shaking like a leaf. I told her what I'd seen, but she just looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. She checked the shoreline and found tracks, big tracks that disappeared into the water. Could be moose, she said, but I could tell she didn't believe it. The next morning, we found our canoe had been moved. Not dragged, moved. It was sitting perfectly upright on the other side of the peninsula, about 100 yards from where we'd left it. There were no drag marks, no signs of how it got there. It was like someone had just picked it up and carried it. That's when Lisa started acting different. Lisa's senses got sharper after that night. She could smell things I couldn't, like when it was going to rain hours before the clouds showed up. She could hear sounds from miles away, and her eyes started reflecting light in the dark, just a little, like an animal's. She said she felt fine, but I caught her sniffing the air like a dog. She stopped eating the food from our packs and started catching fish with her bare hands. When I asked her about it, she just shrugged and said she was feeling more connected to nature. We found the 3rd camp on day 5. This one was different. The bodies were there, but they'd been ... arranged, cached like wolf kills, stacked in a pile and covered with branches. Some of them had been eaten. That's when I knew we weren't dealing with regular animals. I tried to radio for backup, but every time I turned on the radio, those howling voices came through the static. This time, I could make out words. Join us, hunt with us, run with us. Lisa heard them too. She stood there listening with her head tilted, like she was trying to understand something. Then she looked at me and said, "They're calling." "Who's calling?" "The pack. We needed help. So we decided to head for the ranger station at the south end of the wilderness area. But every time we tried to leave, we'd end up going in circles. Our compasses spun wildly. The GPS showed us traveling in straight lines, but the sun and stars said we were going in circles. On the 6th night, they came for us. I woke up to find Lisa standing at the edge of our camp, perfectly still. She was looking out at the water, and there were 7 of them standing in the shallows. They were bigger than the ones I'd seen before, and they were waiting. "Lisa," I whispered, but she didn't respond. The biggest one, the leader, I guess, was standing in the center. It had to be 9 feet tall, with a wolf's head on a human body. Its fur was silver gray, and its eyes glowed yellow in the moonlight. It was looking at Lisa like it knew her. It spoke, and its voice was like gravel mixed with wind. "She belongs to us now. The bite has taken hold." That's when I saw the marks on Lisa's neck. For puncture wounds, mostly healed, that I hadn't noticed before. She'd been bitten, and I'd missed it. "The blood calls to blood," the creature continued. "She will run with us when the moon is full. You can join us, or you can feed us. Choose." Lisa turned to look at me, and her eyes were glowing now. Bright yellow, like the creature's. She smiled, and I saw that her teeth had gotten sharper. "It's not so bad, Mick," she said. "They're family. They take care of each other." I grabbed my gun and pointed it at the leader. "Stay back." It laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. Silver bullets. Perhaps did the old stories teach you that? They'd been toying with us. They could have taken us any time they wanted. They were just waiting for Lisa to complete her transformation. I thought about my grandfather's stories, about the French voyageurs and the loup-garou. One of them had been cursed to become a wolf, and he'd passed that curse down through his bloodline. The creature in front of me could be 200 years old. "You understand now," it said. "I am the first. I am the father of this pack. Your friend carries my mark. Lisa took a step toward the water, then another. She was going to join them. That's when I remembered something else my grandfather had told me, about silver and sacred things, about how some curses could be broken, but only with a terrible price. I had exactly one chance to save Lisa, and it would probably get us both killed. Earlier that day, I'd visited an old Ojibwe elder who lived on the edge of the wilderness. He'd given me bullets blessed with silver and sacred tobacco. He'd also given me a pouch of blessed salt and told me to use it to make a protective circle, but only if you're willing to sacrifice everything. He'd warned. Now I knew what he meant. Lisa was already knee-deep in the water, walking toward the pack. The leader was calling to her in a voice that sounded like wind. Through trees, the other 6 were spreading out, surrounding our camp. I poured the blessed salt in a circle around myself and loaded the silver bullets into my gun. The moment the salt hit the ground, the creatures stopped moving. They could smell what it was. Clever, the leader said. But circles can be broken, and you cannot stay there forever. Lisa, I shouted, you're still human. You can still choose. She stopped walking and turned to look at me. For just a moment, I saw her real self in those glowing eyes. The Lisa I'd worked with for 5 years. The Lisa who'd taught me how to read animal tracks and identify bird calls. I'm sorry, Mick, she said, but they're right. I don't belong with humans anymore. The pack leader lifted its head and howled. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard. Part wolf, part human scream, part something else entirely. The other 6 joined in, and their voices harmonized in a way that made my bones ache. Lisa threw back her head and howled with them, but as she did, her body started changing. Her back arched, her arms stretched, her face pushed out into a muzzle. In less than a minute, she'd become one of them, but something went wrong. Lisa's transformation wasn't complete. She was caught between human and wolf, and the change was tearing her apart. She collapsed in the water, writhing in pain. The pack leader snarled and stepped toward my salt circle. You did this. You prevented her full transformation. Now she suffers. Then let me help her, I said. Break the circle. Join us. Take the bite willingly, and I will ease her pain. I looked at Lisa, thrashing in the shallow water. She was dying, and it was because of me. Because I'd interfered with something I didn't understand. But I also knew that if I left the circle, the pack would kill me and add Lisa to their numbers. More people would die. More rangers would come looking for us and get bitten. The curse would spread. I made the hardest choice of my life. I raised my gun and shot the pack leader with a silver bullet. The bullet hit him in the chest, and he went down screaming. The other pack members rushed toward my circle, but the blessed salt held them back. They clawed at the air just inches from my face, but they couldn't cross the line. The leader wasn't dead, but he was hurt bad. Silver was poison to him. He crawled toward the water, leaving a trail of black blood. Lisa saw what I'd done. With tremendous effort, she pulled herself to her feet. She was still half transformed, still in pain, but she was fighting it, fighting to stay human. Thank you, she said, her voice distorted by the changes to her throat. Now run. She threw herself at the pack leader, using the last of her human will to tackle him into deeper water. The other 6 creatures dove in after them, and the lake exploded in a chaos of splashing and howling. I broke the salt circle and ran for my canoe. Behind me, I could hear Lisa screaming, but I couldn't tell if it was from pain or fury. I paddled, like my life depended on it, which it did. I made it about a mile before the sounds from the lake stopped. When I looked back, the water was still and quiet. There was no sign of Lisa or the pack. The sun was starting to rise, and I'd learned something important. Whatever those creatures were, they didn't like daylight. I found their den 2 days later, guided by the smell of death and the clouds of flies. It was a cave system on a small island, hidden behind a waterfall. The bodies of the missing poachers were there, along with bones that looked much older. Some of them might have been French voyageurs from 200 years ago. I poured gasoline throughout the cave and lit it on fire. The flames burned for 3 days. When the smoke finally cleared, there was nothing left but ash and melted rock. The official report listed Lisa as killed by a bear attack. They transferred me to a different park, saying I needed time to recover from the trauma. I never told anyone what really happened. Who would believe me? But I kept watching the news. Every few months, there'd be reports of hikers and campers going missing in the wilderness areas around the Great Lakes. Some would be found alive, but couldn't remember what happened to them. Others would be found dead, with wounds that didn't match any known animal. A few would never be found at all. The thing is, I never killed the pack leader. I hurt him, but I didn't kill him. And there were others. Lisa mentioned that there were packs in other areas. The curse that started with one French voyageur had spread far beyond the boundary waters. I spent the rest of my career learning everything I could about these creatures. I talked to elders from different tribes. One researched old fur trading records. I even tracked down descendants of the original voyageurs. What I learned scared me more than that night on the lake. The dogmen, that's what some people call them. They're not just random monsters. They're organized, they're spreading, and they're getting bolder. Every full moon, they hunt. Every person they bite becomes one of them. Every pack that forms makes the curse stronger. I'm retired now, but I still get calls from rangers who found camps, like the ones Lisa and I discovered. I tell them the same thing I'm telling you. If you're camping in wolf country during a full moon, don't trust your compass, don't trust your GPS. And if you hear howling that sounds like human voices, don't investigate. Just run, because somewhere out there, the pack is still hunting, and they're always looking for new members. Asterisk, this account was recorded by Michael Stormcrow in 2019, shortly before his death from natural causes. The Boundary Waters canoe area has since implemented new safety protocols for full moon periods, though officials cite increased wildlife activity as the official reason. My name is David Oakenshield, but everyone calls me Dave. I've been a park ranger at Redwood National Park for 8 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these ancient forests could throw at me. Boy, was I wrong. It was the summer of 1975, and California was bone dry. The redwoods, those giant trees that have stood for thousands of years, were stressed like I'd never seen them before. Their needles were brown at the tips, and the forest floor cracked under my boots like old leather. I come from a family of loggers. My grandfather cut trees his whole life, and my father did too. But something about these redwoods made me choose a different path. Maybe it was the way they made me feel small, like I was standing in a cathedral made by God himself. These trees were here before Jesus walked the earth, and I wanted to keep them safe. That's why I became a ranger. That's why I fought the logging companies every single day. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in July. I was checking on the Prairie Creek area, where the tallest trees in the world grow. The canopy was so thick that my radio barely worked, and the morning fog hung between the massive trunks like ghosts. I'd been tracking illegal logging activity for weeks. Some company was sneaking in at night, cutting down trees that were protected by law. But when I found their camp that morning, something was very wrong. The chainsaw lay on the ground, its chain snapped in half. Tools were scattered everywhere, but not like someone had dropped them in a hurry. They were arranged in a pattern, almost like a warning. And then I saw the foreman. His name was Bill Hutchins, and he was a big man who could handle any tree. But he was hanging 15 feet up in the air, impaled on a branch that should have broken under his weight. His eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. No human being could have lifted a 200-pound man that high. No human being was strong enough. I radioed for help, but the forest seemed to swallow my words. The static crackled, and I heard something else underneath it. Something that sounded almost like ... breathing. The sheriff's department said it was an accident. Industrial accidents happen, they told me. Man was probably trying to cut that branch and it fell wrong. But I knew trees. I'd studied them for years, had a degree in forestry. Trees don't just fall upward. Trees don't lift grown men into the air like dolls. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Bill Hutchins and his wide, frightened eyes. I kept thinking about the way his tools were arranged, like some kind of message I couldn't read. The next morning, I went back to the grove. The ancient redwoods towered above me, their trunks so wide that 10 people holding hands couldn't reach around them. The Yurok people who lived here first called them Wojay, the forest giants who guard sacred places. I always thought that was just a story. Walking through the grove, I noticed something strange. The normal sounds of the forest, birds singing, squirrels chattering, insects buzzing, were gone. It was quiet like a tomb. Even the wind seemed afraid to move through the branches. Then I saw the footprints. They were in the soft earth near a stream, and they were massive, 18 inches long, with 5 toes clearly visible. They looked almost human, but no human foot was that big. No human foot left impressions 3 inches deep in hard-packed soil. I followed the tracks deeper into the forest, past trees that were old when the Roman Empire was young. The fog grew thicker, and the silence pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. That's when I heard it. A sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. Part growl, part roar, but with something almost intelligent about it. It came from somewhere, above me, up in the canopy where the light couldn't reach. I looked up, squinting into the green darkness, and I swear I saw something move. Something big, something that shouldn't exist. I ran then. I'm not proud of it, but I ran like a scared child, stumbling over roots and branches, until I made it back to my truck. My hands shook so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. That night, I started reading everything I could find about the old stories. The Yurok legends talked about forest guardians, ancient beings who protected the sacred groves from those who would harm them. But I was a man of science. I didn't believe in monsters. I should have listened to the stories. The next morning, I met with Sarah Brightwater, my partner at the park. Sarah was half Yurok, and she knew these forests better than anyone. She also knew something was wrong. The animals are leaving, she told me, as we walked through the grove. The deer, the elk, even the squirrels, they're all heading away from the old growth sections. Maybe it's the dry weather, I said, but I didn't believe it myself. No, Sarah said, stopping to examine a tree trunk. Look at this. The bark was scratched, deep gouges that went down to the white wood underneath. But these weren't random scratches. They formed a pattern, almost like writing, and they were 10 feet off the ground. What could do this? I asked. Sarah touched the scratches gently. My grandmother used to tell stories about the forest guardians. She said they would mark the trees to warn people away from sacred places. You don't really believe that, do you? She looked at me with dark eyes that seemed older than her 30 years. Dave, my people have lived in these forests for thousands of years. We know things that science books don't teach. That afternoon, we found the second logging crew. They were in a grove of trees that were over 1,000 years old. Some of the most ancient living things on Earth. The loggers had set up their equipment in a circle, like they were planning to cut down a whole section of forest, but they never got the chance. Their chainsaws were twisted into shapes that hurt to look at, metal bent like it was made of clay. The men were gone, not dead, just gone. Their clothes were scattered around, but there was no blood, no bodies. Where did they go? I whispered. Sarah was examining the ground. Look at this. More footprints, but these were different, deeper, fresher, and they led away from the grove, toward the heart of the forest, where the oldest trees grew. We need to follow them, I said. No, Sarah said quickly. We need to leave, now. But I was already walking toward the tracks. I had to know what was happening in my forest. I had to understand. The tracks led us deeper than I'd ever gone before, into a part of the forest where the trees were so old they seemed to whisper secrets. The fog was thicker here, and the silence was complete. Then we heard the sound. It started as a low rumble, like thunder, but it was coming from all around us. The ground vibrated under our feet, and the massive trees seemed to sway without any wind. Sarah grabbed my arm. We need to go now, but it was too late. Something was moving through the forest toward us. Something big enough to shake the earth with every step. I could hear branches breaking, hear the sound of massive feet on the forest floor. We ran. I don't know how we made it back to the truck. I don't remember running, just the sound of our breathing and the sound of something following us through the trees. Something that moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. When we finally stopped, gasping for breath beside my truck, I looked back at the forest. For just a moment, I saw a shadow between the trees. A shadow that stood upright like a man, but was twice as tall as any man should be. Then it was gone. What was that? I asked Sarah. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, my grandmother called them the guardians. She said they sleep in the deep forest, in the places where the oldest trees grow. She said they only wake up when the forest is in danger. That's just a story, is it? Sarah looked at me with those dark eyes. Dave, those logging crews were cutting down trees that have been growing since before Christ was born. Trees that my people consider sacred. If something was going to wake up the guardians, that would do it. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about the shadow I'd seen between the trees. I kept thinking about the missing loggers and the twisted metal. And I kept thinking about the way the forest had felt when we were running, like it was alive. like it was angry. Around midnight, I heard something outside my cabin, footsteps on the porch, but they were too heavy to be human. My dog, Rex, was whining and hiding under the bed. I looked out the window and saw nothing but darkness, but I could feel something watching me, something big and patient and very, very angry. When morning came, I found my equipment arranged in a pattern on the porch. My radio, my flashlight, my first aid kit, all placed in a perfect circle with my badge in the center. It was a message. I didn't understand it then, but I should have. The forest was trying to tell me something. The forest was giving me a warning. The logging company wasn't giving up. When 2 crews disappeared, they sent in more men. But these weren't just loggers. They were security guards with guns and radios and military training. We're going to clean out whatever's in there, their leader told me. His name was Marcus Webb, and he had the look of a man who'd seen combat. Could be bears, could be mountain lions, could be some crazy hermit. Doesn't matter. We have a job to do. I tried to warn them. I tried to tell them about the footprints and the twisted metal and the missing men, but they just laughed. You've been out in the woods too long, Ranger, Webb said, starting to see things that aren't there. They went into the forest with their guns and their confidence. I followed them because I had to. These were my trees, my forest, my responsibility. Sarah came with me. She'd been having dreams, she said. Dreams about the forest screaming. My grandmother is still alive, she told me as we walked. She's 93 and lives on the reservation. I called her last night. What did she say? She said the Guardians are waking up. She said they've been sleeping for 50 years, but now they're angry. The logging companies have gone too far, cut too deep into the sacred groves. Sarah, you're a park ranger. You have a degree in biology. You know there's no such thing as forest guardians. She stopped walking and looked at me. Dave, what do you think happened to those men? What do you think twisted those chainsaws into pretzels? I didn't have an answer. We found Webb's team in the deepest part of the forest, where the trees were, so old they seemed to touch the sky. The men were setting up camp in a circle of redwoods that were over 2,000 years old. You shouldn't be here, I told Webb. This is a protected area. We have permits, he said, showing me a piece of paper. Legal logging operation, but I knew the permits were fake. No one had legal permission to cut down trees this old, this sacred. That's when we heard the first scream. It came from the edge of the camp, where one of the guards was standing watch. But when we looked, he was gone. Just his rifle lying on the ground and his footprints ending in the middle of a clearing. Johnson, Webb shouted. Johnson, report. But there was no answer. Just the sound of wind in the branches and something else. Something that sounded like breathing. Spread out. Webb ordered his men. Find Johnson. They spread out through the forest, their guns ready, their radios crackling. I followed one of them, a young man named Martinez who looked scared. We found Johnson 20 feet up in a tree, wrapped in branches like a cocoon. He was alive, but he was babbling about giants and shadows and eyes that glowed in the dark. Get him down, Webb ordered. But when we tried to climb the tree, the branches moved. They twisted and turned like living things, pushing us away, protecting Johnson like he was being saved. What the hell? Martinez whispered. That's when we saw it. It moved through the forest like a shadow, but it was solid, real. It stood 12 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown hair, with arms that hung down to its knees. Its face was almost human, but the eyes, ... The eyes were old, ancient, intelligent. It looked at us, and I felt like it was looking into my soul. Webb raised his rifle, but the creature moved faster than anything that big should be able to move. It reached out with one massive hand and crushed the gun like it was made of paper. Then it spoke, not with words, but with a sound that went straight to my bones. A sound that said, "Leave. Now. This is your only warning." Webb and his men ran. They left their equipment, left Johnson in the tree, and ran like the devil was chasing them. Maybe he was. Sarah and I stayed behind. We couldn't leave Johnson, even if the creature was protecting him. We waited until the thing disappeared back into the forest. Then we got Johnson down from the tree. He was in shock, but he was alive. As we helped him walk back to the trucks, he kept mumbling about the Guardian. "It didn't hurt me," he said. "It could have killed me, but it didn't. It just ... it just wanted us to leave." That night, I met with Sarah's grandmother. Her name was Agnes Brightwater, and she was one of the last people who remembered the old ways. "The Guardians have been sleeping," she told me in a voice like dry leaves. But you white men have gone too far. You're cutting down the mother trees, the grandmothers that have watched over this forest since the beginning of time. Mrs. Brightwater, I need to understand. What are they? What do they want? She looked at me with eyes that had seen nearly a century of changes. They are the forest made flesh, the spirit of the trees given form. They wake up when the forest is in danger, when the sacred groves are threatened. How do we stop them? You don't stop them, young man. You listen to them. The forest is trying to tell you something. It's trying to save itself. She gave me a bundle of herbs and told me about the old rituals, the ways her people used to communicate with the guardians. But she also gave me a warning. They are patient, but they are not forgiving. If the cutting doesn't stop, if the sacred groves are destroyed, they will do more than just scare people away. They will fight back. What does that mean? It means anyone who threatens the forest will die. The logging company brought in the military, not real military, but private contractors with military equipment, helicopters, night vision, automatic, weapons. They set up a base camp outside the forest and prepared for war. We're going to kill whatever's in there, Webb told me. Companies tired of losing men and equipment. They want this problem solved permanently. I tried to stop them. I called my supervisors, called the state police, called anyone who would listen. But the logging company had permits, even if they were fake. They had lawyers and money and politicians in their pockets. You can't do this, I told Webb. Those trees are thousands of years old. They're irreplaceable. They're just trees, he said. Big trees, but still just trees. That's when I realized he didn't understand. He couldn't understand. To him, the forest was just wood waiting to be cut down. He couldn't see the life in it, the spirit, the ancient consciousness that had been growing for millennia. But I could. After everything I'd seen, everything I'd experienced, I finally understood what the forest was trying to tell me. The guardians weren't monsters. They were protectors. They were the forest's way of defending itself against those who would destroy it. And I had to choose which side I was on. The attack came at dawn. Webb's men moved into the forest with their weapons and their night vision, hunting for the guardians. They found them in the heart of the sacred grove, where the oldest trees grew. The battle was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The guardians moved through the forest like ghosts, using the trees themselves as weapons. Branches bent down to grab the soldiers, roots rose up to trip them, and the fog became so thick that the men couldn't see 5 feet in front of them. But the guardians weren't trying to kill, they were trying to protect. They disarmed the soldiers, destroyed their equipment, and drove them from the forest without seriously hurting anyone, until Webb got desperate. He had a flamethrower, and he started burning the trees. Ancient redwoods that had stood for thousands of years began to burn, their thick bark smoking and crackling in the flames. That's when the guardians got angry, really angry. The Alpha Guardian, the biggest one, the one I'd seen before, came out of the forest like a force of nature. It was 15 feet tall, with muscles like tree trunks, and eyes that burned with fury. It grabbed Webb and lifted him into the air like he weighed nothing. For a moment, I thought it was going to kill him, tear him apart for burning the sacred trees. But then it looked at me, and I understood. I remembered what Agnes Brightwater had told me about the old rituals. I remembered the bundle of herbs she'd given me, and I remembered that I had to choose. I stepped forward, pulling out the herbs, and I spoke the words she'd taught me, words in the old language, words that meant friend of the forest and protector of the sacred groves. The guardian looked at me, and I felt something pass between us, an understanding, a connection. It set Webb down gently and stepped back. The other guardians emerged from the forest, surrounding us but not threatening. They were waiting. You have to choose, I said to Webb. You can keep fighting, keep trying to cut down these trees, and they'll keep fighting back. Or you can leave. You can find somewhere else to log, somewhere that isn't sacred. Webb looked around at the guardians, at the burned trees, at his defeated men. Then he looked at me. This isn't over, he said. But it was. The logging company pulled out that day, taking their equipment and their fake permits with them. The federal government stepped in and made the grove permanently protected, expanding the park boundaries to include all of the sacred trees. And I made my choice. I stayed in the forest. I became the guardian of the guardians, the bridge between the human world and the ancient consciousness of the trees. Sarah joined me, and together we learned the old ways, the rituals and ceremonies that kept the peace between two worlds. The guardians went back to sleep, but they didn't go away. They're still there, watching, waiting, protecting the sacred groves from those who would destroy them. That was 40 years ago, and I'm still here. I'm the head ranger now, and this forest is safer than it's ever been. The trees that Webb burned grew back, their scars healed by time and care. But I'm not the same man I was in 1975. I've seen things that changed me, learned things that science books don't teach. I know that the forest is alive in ways that most people can't imagine. I know that the old stories are true, that there are guardians watching over the sacred places. Other rangers have reported similar encounters in Olympic National Park, in the Cascade Range, in forests up and down the Pacific coast. The guardians are waking up everywhere, responding to the threats against the old-growth forests. Most people don't believe the stories. They think we're crazy, that we've been in the woods too long. But the logging companies believe. They know to stay away from the sacred groves, know that some places are protected by more than just laws. I still see them sometimes, the guardians, usually just glimpses between the trees, shadows that move when there's no wind. But sometimes, when the moon is full and the fog is thick, I'll find offerings left. On my porch, stones arranged in patterns, branches woven into shapes, gifts from the forest to say thank you. Sarah's grandmother died 10 years ago, but she passed the old knowledge to us before she went. We teach it to the young rangers, the ones who are willing to listen. We tell them about the guardians, about the consciousness of the trees, about the responsibility we have to protect what's sacred. Because the forest needs protectors. It needs people who understand that some things are more important than money, more valuable than lumber. It needs people who know that the guardians are real, and that they're watching. If you ever find yourself in an old-growth forest, in a place where the trees are ancient and the silence is deep, remember this story. Remember that you're not alone. The guardians are there, sleeping in the shadows, waiting. And if you're thinking about hurting the forest, about cutting down the sacred trees, remember this too. They're not just sleeping, they're watching, they're protecting, and they're older and stronger than anything you can imagine. The forest has guardians. Respect them, and they'll let you pass. Threaten what they protect, and you'll learn why the loggers call them the Guardian's Wrath. My name is David Oakenshield, and I've been keeping this secret for 40 years. But I'm getting old now, and the young rangers need to know the truth. The guardians are real. The forest is alive, and some things are worth fighting for, even if it means choosing between the human world and the world of the trees. I chose the trees. I chose the guardians, and I've never regretted it. The forest is safe. The guardians are watching, and I'm still here, still protecting, still learning from the ancient wisdom of the trees. Some secrets are too important to keep forever. This is one of them. Remember the guardians. Respect the forest. And if you're ever walking alone in the old-growth groves, and you hear something moving in the shadows, don't be afraid. They're just watching. They're just protecting. They're just doing what guardians do. My name is Patrick Grimwald, and I've been a park ranger for 20 years. I've seen bears tear apart campsites, watched wolves hunt in packs, and tracked mountain lions through snow. But nothing in my training prepared me for what happened in the summer of 1969. The Adirondack Mountains are beautiful, but they're also wild. Miles of forest stretch between small towns, and when something goes wrong out there, you're pretty much on your own. I love that about my job. My father fought in World War I, and my mother used to tell me scary stories from the old country. In Germany, stories about creatures that lived in the Black Forest. I never believed any of it. That summer was different from the start. The heat was terrible, and there hadn't been rain in weeks. Animals were acting strange, deer coming too close to campsites, bears wandering into town in broad daylight. Even the birds seemed nervous, always calling out warnings about something. Camp Wildwood sat 25 miles from the nearest town, tucked between two mountain lakes. It was a place where city kids came to learn about nature. The camp director, Mr. Henderson, was a good man who really cared about the children. He'd been running the camp for 15 years without any serious problems. Then the calls started coming in. Ranger Grimwald, Henderson said over the radio one morning, "We've got a situation here. Some of the kids are saying they saw wolves around the camp last night. Wolves weren't that unusual, but something in his voice made me worry." "How many wolves, Mr. Henderson?" "That's the weird part. The kids say they saw 5 or 6, but they were walking on their back legs, like people. I laughed, but it didn't sound funny. Kids have big imaginations, especially at night. I know that. But Ranger Grimwald, these kids are scared, really scared. And some of our counselors heard strange sounds too, like wolves howling, but different. I promised to come take a look. The drive to Camp Wildwood took me through some of the most remote forest in New York. Pine trees stretched up like cathedral walls, and the silence was so thick you could feel it pressing against your ears. When I got to the camp, I could see the fear on everyone's faces. The children stayed close to the buildings, and the counselors kept looking over their shoulders. Henderson met me at the main lodge, and I could see he hadn't slept much. The sound started 3 nights ago, he said. At first, we thought it was just regular wolves. But then Sarah, she's one of our counselors, she swears she heard them talking in German. She studied it in college. She said it sounded like German words mixed in with the howling. I felt something cold touch my spine, but I pushed it away. My mother's old stories were just that, stories. Show me where they saw these wolves. Henderson led me to the edge of the camp, where the forest began. Right away, I saw tracks in the dry dirt. They were big, bigger than any wolf I'd ever seen. But that wasn't what made my hands shake. The tracks showed claws, like a wolf, but the shape was wrong. They were longer, more like a human foot. Mr. Henderson, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, I want you to keep all the children inside tonight. Lock the doors, and don't let anyone go out alone. He nodded, but I could see the question in his eyes. What was I afraid of? I wish I could have told him, but I was starting to remember my mother's stories, and they were stories I'd tried very hard to forget. That night, I made camp about a mile from the main lodge. I had my rifle, my radio, and 20 years of experience. I thought that would be enough. As the sun went down, the forest got quiet, too quiet. No insects, no night birds, no small animals moving through the brush. Then I heard it. A long, low howl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was answered by another, then another. Soon the forest was full of howling, but not like any wolves I'd ever heard. These sounds had words in them, foreign words. That made my blood run cold, because I recognized some of them. They were the same German words my mother used to whisper when she told her scary stories. Words about hunters who became monsters, about curses that followed bloodlines across oceans. I checked my rifle and tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew my mother's stories were about to become very real. The next morning, I found the first body. Tommy Martinez was the camp's maintenance worker, a good man with 3 kids of his own. He'd gone out early to check the water pumps near the lake. I found him about 200 yards from the shore, and I knew right away that no regular animal had killed him. The bite marks were huge, but they were precise. Whatever had done this knew exactly where to strike. Tommy's toolbox was nearby, but someone or something had arranged his tools in a perfect line. That's not something a wild animal does. I called the state wildlife office, and they sent Officer Jane Murphy. I'd worked with Jane before. She was tough, smart, and didn't scare easily. But when she saw Tommy's body, her face went white. What kind of animal makes bite marks like that? She asked. I don't know, but look at this. I showed her the arranged tools, and look at these tracks. The tracks were everywhere now, not just at the camp's edge. They formed a rough circle around Tommy's body, like the creature had been studying him. Some of the tracks showed all 4 paws, but others showed just 2 feet, like something that could choose whether to walk like an animal or a person. Could be a trained dog, Jane said, but she didn't sound convinced. Maybe someone's using attack dogs to scare the camp. I wanted to believe that. It would mean we were dealing with people, not whatever my mother used to describe in her stories. We went back to the camp and talked to Henderson. He was trying to keep the children calm, but I could see the fear spreading. Some of the parents were already driving up to take their kids home early. We need to evacuate the camp, I told Henderson. I can't do that, he said. These kids paid good money to come here. Their parents trust me to keep them safe. Then, let me and Officer Murphy handle this. Keep everyone inside after dark, and don't let anyone go out alone. That afternoon, Jane and I searched the forest around the camp. We found more tracks, and something else that made my stomach turn. Claw marks on trees, but not random scratches. These marks looked like letters, like someone was trying to write words with claws. Most of the marks were too rough to read, but one set was clear enough. Scratched deep into the bark of an old oak tree were 4 letters. Rot. What's that mean? Jane asked. My mouth went dry. It was another German word from my mother's stories. Revenge. That night, we took turns keeping watch. I was on duty when I heard the first howl, somewhere close to the camp. It was answered by another, then another. Soon the forest was full of sounds that definitely weren't normal wolves. I woke Jane up. Listen. The howling was getting closer, and now I could make out words. German words, spoken in voices that sounded almost human but not quite. They were calling out what sounded like orders, like soldiers talking to each other. My God, Jane whispered. Are those really animals? Before I could answer, we heard screaming from the camp. We grabbed our rifles and ran toward the lodge. The screaming was coming from the girls' cabin. When we got there, we found the counselors trying to calm down a group of terrified children. They were at the window. One of the girls sobbed. Big dogs, but walking like people, and they were wearing clothes. Sarah, the counselor who spoke German, was white as a sheet. They were talking, giving orders. One of them said they were looking for Der Sonde, Soldaten, the soldier's son. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. My father had been a soldier. He'd fought in France in World War I. He'd never talked much about what he'd done over there, but I knew he'd seen terrible things. We need to get these kids out of here, I told Henderson. Tonight, but when we tried to start the camp's bus, it wouldn't turn over. The engine had been torn apart. Someone had reached under the hood and destroyed it with their bare hands, or claws. We checked the radio dead. The phone lines had been cut. Whatever was out there, it was smart enough to cut us off from the outside world. And it was looking for me specifically. As we stood there in the dark, trying to figure out what to do next, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A voice, speaking clear English with a thick German accent, coming from the forest just beyond the camp lights. Patrick Grimwald, son of Heinrich Grimwald, we know you are here. Come to us, and the children will be safe. Jane grabbed my arm. How do they know your name? How do they know your father's name? I wished I could tell her, but I was starting to understand that. My mother's stories weren't just stories, they were warnings, and the thing my father had done in France during the war had followed our family across the ocean. The voice called out again. We have waited 50 years for this chance. You cannot run from what your father did to us. In the distance, I could see shapes moving between the trees, big shapes that sometimes walked on 4 legs and sometimes on 2. And I knew our nightmare was just beginning. By morning, 3 more camp counselors were dead. We found them arranged in a line outside the dining hall, like soldiers standing at attention. But these weren't random killings. Each body showed the same precise bite marks, and each one had been stripped of something specific. A watch from one, a ring from another, a small cross necklace from the third. They're taking trophies, Jane said, but her voice was shaking. The worst part was the message they'd left behind. Using the counselor's blood, something had written German words across the side of the dining hall. Sarah translated them for us, tears streaming down her face. It says, the pack remembers, the pack takes payment, the pack will have justice. Henderson was barely holding it together. I'm getting these kids out of here. I don't care if I have to carry them out on my back. But when we tried to leave on foot, we found out why the creatures had been so patient. They'd been herding us, like wolves hunting deer. Every trail leading away from camp was blocked by fallen trees that had been deliberately pushed over. The creatures were strong enough to topple huge pines and smart enough to trap us. There's an old hunting cabin about 5 miles north. I told the group, it's got a radio. If we can get there, we can call for help. We started walking, 30 scared kids and 5 adults, through forest that felt more dangerous with every step. The creatures were following us. I could hear them moving parallel to our group, always staying just out of sight. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of something big and dark between the trees, but when I looked directly, it was gone. After 2 hours, we stopped to rest. The kids were exhausted, and some of the smaller ones were crying. That's when Sarah grabbed my arm. Listen, she whispered. At first, I didn't hear anything. Then I realized that was the problem. The forest was completely silent. No birds, no insects, no small animals. Even the wind had stopped. They're getting ready to attack, I said. We formed a circle around the children, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. These weren't ordinary predators. They were planning something. The first attack came from 3 directions at once. I got my first clear look at what we were dealing with, and my mother's stories came flooding back. They were dogmen creatures that looked like huge wolves but walked upright like people. Their faces were wolf-like, but their eyes showed human intelligence, and they were wearing pieces of clothing, military clothing. One of them wore a torn German uniform jacket. Another had dog tags around its neck. A third carried what looked like a military knife, but it was holding the weapon like a human would, not like an animal. Jane got off 2 shots before the first creature reached her. I saw her bullets hit, but the dogman barely slowed down. It knocked her to the ground and would have killed her, but Henderson hit it with a tree branch. The creature turned on him, with a sound that was half growl, half human scream. "Get the kids to the cabin," I shouted, firing at another dogman that was circling around behind us. We ran. The children were screaming, the adults were shouting, and behind us the dogmen were howling in voices that sounded like human soldiers giving orders. I understood enough German to know they were coordinating their attack. The cabin was small and old, but it had thick walls and a heavy door. We got everyone inside and barricaded the entrance. The radio was dead, of course. The creatures had probably destroyed the antenna. Outside, we could hear them talking, not howling, talking. In German, Sarah listened at the window and translated. They're arguing about strategy. One of them wants to burn us out. Another one says they need to take the soldier's son alive. They're talking about their commander, someone they called Der Hauptmann, the captain. Captain of what? Henderson asked. I was starting to understand. I think they're German soldiers. From World War II. That's impossible. Jane said, that was almost 30 years ago. Not if they're not human anymore. As if to prove my point, one of the creatures appeared at the window. It was the biggest one yet, easily 8 feet tall. Its face was like a German shepherd, but the eyes were human. It wore a tattered German officer's uniform, complete with medals and rank insignia. When it spoke, the voice was cultured, educated, the voice of someone who had once been a man. Patrick Grimwald, I am Captain Klaus Brenner of the Wehrmacht. Your father killed my men in France. Now I will kill everyone you try to protect. The creature's eyes fixed on mine, but first I will tell you what your father did. He was supposed to take prisoners. Instead, he executed my entire squad. 23 good soldiers, shot down like animals. I felt the blood drain from my face. My father had never talked about the war, but now I knew why. We died cursing his name, the dogman continued, and when we came back, we brought that curse with us. We have been hunting your family for 50 years. My father's dead, I said, but his bloodline lives, and we will have our revenge. The creature stepped back from the window, and I heard it giving orders to the others. They were preparing for a final assault. I looked around the cabin, 30 scared kids, 2 wounded adults, and me, against a pack of supernatural soldiers who'd been planning this for decades. But as I checked my rifle, I remembered something else from my mother's stories. The monsters could be beaten. It just required sacrifice and the right kind of weapon. I prayed I was brave enough to do what needed to be done. The assault began at midnight. The dogman came at us from all sides, using military tactics I recognized from my father's old war books. They'd studied human warfare, and they remembered everything from their time as soldiers. But they also had supernatural strength and wolf-like speed. The first wave was just testing our defenses. They threw rocks and tree branches at the cabin, trying to find weak spots. When Jane shot at one through a window, it dodged the bullet with inhuman reflexes. They're playing with us, Henderson said. He was right. Captain Brenner's voice carried clearly through the walls. You cannot win, Grimwald. Surrender now, and I will make the children's deaths quick. I had to make a choice. I could stay in the cabin and hope rescue would come, or I could go outside and face them. But if I waited, everyone would die. If I went out there, at least the kids might have a chance. I'm going out, I told the others. That's suicide, Jane said. Maybe, but it's the only chance we have. I opened the door before anyone could stop me. The forest was full of glowing eyes, at least 8 dogmen surrounding the cabin. They were massive, each one bigger than the largest wolf I'd ever seen. But they moved with human intelligence, taking positions like soldiers in battle. Captain Brenner stepped forward. In the moonlight, I could see his face clearly. It was the face of a wolf, but the expression was human, angry, intelligent, and completely insane. Your father was a coward, he said. He shot my men while they We're surrendering now, you will pay for his crimes. My father did what he had to do, I replied, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Your father was a murderer, and murderers deserve to have their bloodlines ended. The captain gestured to his pack. They began to circle me, like wolves preparing to bring down prey. But these weren't animals. They were military veterans who had become something much worse. Before we kill you, the captain said, I want you to know the truth. We were not ordinary soldiers. We were part of a special unit, sent to France to recover ancient artifacts, things that should have stayed buried. He pulled something from his uniform, a small, dark object that seemed to absorb light. This is what cursed us, a relic from the Black Forest, something the old Germanic tribes used to transform their warriors into wolves. When your father killed us, our blood soaked into this artifact. It brought us back, but not as men. I understood now. My mother's stories had been true. The old magic was real, and it had followed my family across the ocean. But curses can be broken, I said, remembering the end of my mother's tales. The captain laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Not this one. This curse feeds on revenge, and we have been feeding it for 50 years. He raised his hand, and the other dogmen prepared to attack. But I had one last card to play. If you want revenge, I shouted, then fight me fairly. 1-on-1. If you win, you can kill everyone. If I win, you let the children go. The captain's eyes narrowed. You think you can defeat me? I think you're still enough of a soldier to accept a challenge. For a moment, the captain was silent. Then he nodded. Very well. But when I tear your throat out, I want you to know that your father's shame dies with you. The other dogmen backed away, forming a circle around us. The captain began to change, becoming more wolf-like, more monstrous. His uniform tore as his body grew larger and more powerful. But as he transformed, I saw something else. The dark artifact was glowing, feeding on his rage, and I realized what I had to do. Instead of fighting the captain, I went for the artifact. He was stronger and faster than me, but I had one advantage. I was still human. I could think like a human, instead of like a predator. I feinted left, then dove right, rolling under the captain's claws. My hand closed around the artifact, and immediately I felt the curse trying to enter my mind. Images of my father's war crimes, voices whispering about revenge and bloodshed. But I also felt something else. The pain of the German soldiers, their fear and confusion when they realized they were transforming into monsters. They hadn't chosen this curse. It had been forced on them. You don't have to stay monsters, I said, holding the artifact high. You can choose to be human again. The captain snarled, but something in his eyes changed. For just a moment, he looked like a man instead of a beast. We cannot go back, he said. We are damned. Not if you choose forgiveness over revenge. I raised the artifact above my head and brought it down hard on a rock. The dark object shattered, and immediately the forest was filled with light. The dogmen began to scream, but their voices were changing, becoming human again. The captain fell to his knees, his body shifting back to human form. But he was old, so old. 50 years of supernatural existence had finally caught up with him. Danke, he whispered. Thank you. One by one, the other dogmen transformed back into men, but they were dying, their bodies finally accepting the deaths they should have experienced decades ago. As they faded away, I saw them smile. They were free. The captain was the last to go. Tell your father, he said, that we forgive him. War makes monsters of us all. Then he was gone, and the forest was quiet again. The rescue teams found us the next morning. The radio had started working again as soon as the curse was broken. The official report said we'd been attacked by a pack of rabid wolves, and that the extreme stress had caused mass hallucinations. I didn't argue with that story. Who would believe the truth? Camp Wildwood was closed permanently. The insurance company paid out, and Henderson used the money to start a new camp in a different state. He never talked about what happened that night, but sometimes I'd catch him staring into the forest with a look I recognized. The look of someone who'd seen too much. Jane transferred to a different district. She said she needed to work somewhere that didn't have so many trees. I understood. The forest would never feel safe to her again. The children went home to their families, and most of them seemed to recover. Kids are resilient that way, but a few of them still write to me sometimes, asking if I've seen any more big dogs that walk like people. I always tell them no, but I keep my letters cheerful and brief. I stayed in the Adirondacks, but I changed my job. I became a specialist in unusual animal behavior, investigating reports of creatures that don't fit the normal categories. My superiors think I'm studying cryptozoology. They don't know I'm really hunting things that should have stayed buried. Because Captain Brenner's story got me thinking. If one group of cursed soldiers made it to America, there might be others. World War II left a lot of unfinished business, and some of that business involves forces that most people can't imagine. I've investigated 7 cases since 1969. 3 turned out to be hoaxes. 2 were just unusual but normal animals. But the other 2, well, let's just say some curses are harder to break than others. The worst part is knowing that my father's actions in France set all of this in motion. I've done research, talked to other veterans, tried to understand what really happened over there. From what I can piece together, my father's unit was ambushed by Brenner's men. My father was the only survivor, and he made a choice that haunted him for the rest of his life. I don't know if what he did was right or wrong. War is complicated, and desperate men do desperate things. But I do know that actions have consequences. And sometimes those consequences follow you across oceans and decades. I'm older now, getting ready to retire, but I still keep my rifle clean and my silver bullets blessed, because I learned something important that night in the forest. Monsters are real, but they're not always born that way. Sometimes they're made by circumstances, by choices, by the terrible things people do to each other. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, you can help them find their way back to being human again. I still have nightmares about that summer, but they're not about the dogmen anymore. They're about the look in Captain Brenner's eyes when he realized he could choose forgiveness over revenge. That's a lesson I try to remember every day. Some curses can be broken, some monsters can be saved, but you have to be willing to risk everything to find out which ones are worth saving. The forest around Camp Wildwood is quiet now. I visit sometimes, just to make sure, but I never go alone, and I never go after dark. Because even though the curse is broken, the memory of what happened there will never completely fade, and sometimes, on very quiet nights, I swear I can still hear voices in the wind. Not angry voices anymore, but grateful ones. The voices of soldiers who finally found their way home. That's worth remembering when the world seems too dark to bear. Even monsters can find redemption if someone's willing to help them look for it. But I still keep my rifle loaded, just in case.